Right, so good afternoon or morning or evening to everyone joining us today, depending where you are in the world. My name is Katie James and I work at the Travel Foundation and have been involved with several projects focused on reducing plastic and promoting resource efficiency. So please introduce yourselves in the chat, and a big welcome to the third in this series of 4 webinars that have been organised as part of the Transforming Tourism Value Chains project in collaboration with the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Programme and the World Tourism Organization. So the topic today is circularity of plastic products in the tourism sector. And the last remaining webinar will take place a week today and will cover sustainable food systems in tourism. And we'll post these invitation links in the chat as we go through the webinar today. So the Transforming Tourism Value Chains project is led by the United Nations Environment Programme and funded by the German government's International Climate Change Initiative. The Travel Foundation is an implementation partner for this project, and we're pleased to be hosting this webinar today. And for anyone who's not familiar with that project, it's aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving resource efficiency in key tourism sector value chains with high resource use in 4 countries, the Philippines, St. Lucia, Mauritius, and the Dominican Republic. So moving on to today's topic. So every year, 8 million tons of plastic ends up in the sea. And if these trends continue, there'll be more plastic in our seas than fish by 2050, which is probably a stat that I'm sure a lot of you have seen. Now, tourism plays a big role in contributing to this problem of single-use plastics, but it also has the potential to be part of the solution. So today's webinar will focus on providing practical tips and actions to inspire, incentivize, and guide hoteliers to reduce consumption and increase circularity of plastics in their operations. Our presenters will share first-hand insights and examples of how plastic can be reduced, how barriers can be overcome, and most importantly, how actions can positively impact the overall operations. So here is a brief agenda, and we have 3 great speakers today, and I'm really looking forward to their presentations. So each one will be around 12 minutes long, followed by a Q&A. So the Q&A will take place at the end of all 3 presentations. So please add any questions that you have for the speakers in the Q&A section of the Zoom at the bottom of your screen. And these will be picked up by us and we'll come back to them at the end. And please also feel free to share your own stories, examples and insights, particularly if you're a hotel or accommodation owner yourself. We'd really be interested in hearing about them. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and the video recording will be available afterwards, as will the presentations from all of our speakers. So we'll send links out to those as well. So now to introduce our speakers for today. So firstly, we're going to hear from Ele Papapetrou, who has 30 years experience of working in hotel management in Australia and Cyprus. She's currently the general manager of Atlantica Santa Napa Hotel in Cyprus. And this is how the Travel Foundation got to know about Ele and all of the fantastic work she's been doing in the hotel to boost the circularity of plastics. So we actually have just finished implementing a 3-year project in Cyprus, which was working with tourism businesses and local communities in the resort areas of Ayia Napa and Proteros to reduce plastics. And this is when we started that project, we found that Ele's hotel was really ahead of the curve in this, in terms of the policies that she has put in place and overseen to eliminate plastics and boost circularity. So that was really inspiring for us to see. For the second presentation today, we're delighted to welcome Megan Morikawa, who's the Global Director of Sustainability at Iberostar Group, who has, as recently as this week, I think, been awarded the most sustainable travel company at the TTG Travel Industry Awards. So with a biology PhD from Stanford, Megan has brought a scientific perspective to drive Iberostar's pioneering wave of change movement or program, which I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about today. And last but definitely not least, we have a presentation from Joe Hendricks, the founder of Travel Without Plastic, which is the go-to organization for supporting hospitality businesses to reduce plastic waste and improve circularity. So Joe has over 25 years experience in tourism, from tour operating to health and safety auditing. So she brings an inside understanding of the challenges that businesses can face when implementing more sustainable practices, and has really put this insight to good use by focusing on practical solutions that really work and make business sense. So first of all, I'd really like to invite Ellie to share her screen and start our first presentation. Okay, thank you.
You can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I joined Atlantica Santa Napa in November 2016, which was the end of the season. So my first season was in 2017. And this is where, as a team, we felt the need to take a step forward and make a positive difference. Our goal was to minimize plastic in our hotel. Therefore, the first step was to abolish plastic bottles and bathroom amenities. Just to let you know, the Atlantica Santa Napa is 261 rooms with 650 to 680 guests daily from May to September. We were a little bit skeptical about our move, but we're very determined to do it. Therefore, I will tell you now what we actually achieved so far. Next slide, please. So we spoke with several of our suppliers and we started purchasing in bulk packaging, goods deliveries in paper packaging, all reusable. In the beginning, as I said, we had many suppliers, saying it's not achievable and how it's going to be done. But as I say, where there's will, there's always a way. So we managed to do that. We spoke with our laundry company and they're providing all the toweling in bundles. So there's no plastic wrapping or anything. So we abolished that completely. We buy, for example, bulk plastic containers for our chemicals and softeners, and we give them back and they refill them. We have spoken with our bakery and they deliver the actual loaves without plastic covers, vegetables, fruit, all this kind of stuff. They're now delivered in reusable containers. Next one, please. So at the moment, we're using polycarbonate and paper cups for tea, coffee, and water by 100%. Use only biodegradable straws by 100%, only on request, if the guests ask. If they don't, we don't provide it. There is no liners in the room, in the bins we have in the rooms. And this way, we also separate the plastic from the tins and everything. During COVID, we had to put them back, but now we have removed them again. We use biodegradable rubbish bin liners in the public areas. Use polycarbonate, different sizes, clear and white cups in the pastry for the buffet by 100%. And we abolish completely individual bathroom amenities to bulk. Next slide, please. Therefore, in 2016, we had purchased 62,433, excuse me, pieces of little bottles, shampoo, conditioners, creams, and everything to the value of 9,254. In 2017, we placed dispensers everywhere in the rooms, in the public areas. The cost was €2,942. And obviously we had a substantial saving there, not huge, but was a very good one. It was started and very motivating for us to keep doing it. Therefore, 2018, 19, 21, 22, no bottles whatsoever. Next slide, please. For coffee during the day, we use tea coffee stirrers by 100%. The ice cream plastic cups have been replaced by ice cream cones. one use only cutlery at the kiosk, plates and everything else, they have been replaced with wooden ones. With our guests who are arriving late after the restaurant is closed, we provide them with a large paper cup of water, and we introduce them to our water fountain, to which I will elaborate a little bit further later. And because of all these initiatives, Atlantica Sancta Napa was invited by Cyprus Sustainable Tourism Initiative to share our environmental and sustainable actions. They took a photo shoot for the to be part of Tree Care Foundation campaign, Keep Sun and Sea Plastic Free in Cyprus, which it was honestly very rewarding to be part of this amazing initiative of TUI. Next slide, please. Because we were trying to abolish the plastic bottles in the food and beverage outlets and everywhere in the hotel, we had to source some kind of way where our guests would be utilizing the fountain, the water fountain. So we source an eco-friendly water bottle for our guests to use instead of the plastic cups and the paper cups, because we're trying to minimize those as well. The bottles are certified by local authorities. The material is basically the same material like the baby bottles, so they're very safe and reusable. We source glass water bottles, which we use for lunch and dinner. These glass bottles are disinfected twice a week. We have a laboratory that they come and they take samples of the water and in the dispense, so we ensure that the water is of high quality, and to make sure that this is what we provide to our guests. At the water fountain, in order to ensure our guests understand why we're doing this abolishing of the plastic bottles, we put two signs. The one was saying, "Dear guests, bottled water creates mountains of garbage and causes other major environmental harms. Please refill your bottle from this fountain." We thank them for their support. And this is written in 4 languages. So we try to make the guests understand, you know, how important it is to help us to make this happen. We additionally, can you please have the next slide? We have advised, again, another sign around the public areas close to the water fountain, where we're saying, an effort to enhance our environmental initiatives, Atlantica Sancta Napa sells eco-friendly water bottles, which we say is like a nice gift or a memoir from Atlantica Sancta Napa. And it is, we explain about the bottles again. And we do say to the guests, inform the guests that children within ages 2 to 11, they receive a free bottle upon their arrival to the hotel. The adults can purchase the bottle for €6, which is a very inexpensive fee, I should say. And €1 from this purchase goes to children with autism. And I have to say, it's been supported by our guests, and we're very, very grateful. Then next slide, please. Also around the public areas, because we have a lot of polycarbonated cups, we ask our guests kindly to return them back to us, because we have found in 2019, we had a big loss. Many guests that will take them with them, either down to the city or the beach, or throw them away. So we had to basically ask them kindly to use them and return them back to the pool bar. So we have put a sign up, help us conserve the nature, use me, reuse me, try not to lose me, return me to the bar when you have finished with me. Was it 100% successful? Not really, but we made a small difference, which this is what we try. Slowly, slowly we get around it. The next slide, please. So 2017, we purchased 25,896 plastic bottles to the value of 3,625. 2018, it was when we actually started implementing the eco-friendly bottles and the glass water bottles in the restaurant. So we use only 15,378 bottles, and we use none since 2019. So the hotel, it is 96% plastic free, and we're very, very proud of it. The next slide, please. Our bigger, what kind of challenge, it was how to abolish the portion butter and margarine plastic containers. We got to the stage that we purchased a machine which would give a portion of butter or margarine when the guest needed it, but it was very messy, it wasn't working. So we sent it back, and we came up with this idea where this container you see on the slide, underneath there is an ice pack. We put that in the freezer for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We place the butter and the margarine. And we have here that in 2021, we operated from June to September with 52,881 guests. We purchased portion butter and margarine to 49,800 little plastic portions to the price of 2,488. In 2022, from April to September, with guests, 88,100 guests, we bought bulk butter and margarine to the price of 2,043. Basically, we saved the environment from almost 50,000 little portions, butter and margarine, and our cost, it went down as well. And it's something we're going to continue to do because we are quite pleased with the result. The next slide, please. One initiative which we kind of stirred the pot, I have to say, because we had a lot of reaction. It was a letter we had sent to our associates, and we were basically informing them that from February 22, we're going to source companies that they can minimize the plastic packaging. And we needed them to tell us who was willing to do it so we can establish the new relationship for year 2022. Many of them came back and said it's impossible and all these excuses everybody finds, but we had a good percentage where they're willing to look into it. And we have a very, very successful successfully achieved, I have to say, a small percentage. Of course, you never get 100%, but every bit helps. This is our principle. So I'm sure next year we're going to have more of the suppliers joining us, and we endeavor to have a good percentage by hopefully by 2024. Next slide, please. Because of our initiatives, I mean, obviously, as you can see, we're not talking about huge amounts of saving, but we see a big reduction on the plastic. For us, this is what the aim was. And our owners, I have to say, they've been amazing support to our efforts. And honestly, we can't thank them enough for being always by our side, supporting us. And because of all this we have achieved so far, we have received certain awards, like the Twin Nautic gave us a special sustainability award for being perceived as the most environmental friendly hotel in Cyprus for 2018. Only 3 hotels in Cyprus received such award. We have recertified from 2017 to 22 as called Travel Life. And of course, we have been awarded as the Zero Waste Cheap Beach Champion in the category of environmental responsibility by Coca-Cola and TUI Foundations 2019. 20 and 21, they didn't have any awards, but then on 2022, Atlantic has been awarded as a zero waste beach champion in the category of innovation, again by Coca-Cola and Twin Care Foundation's 2022. And I think this is my last slide. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation. If you have any queries, I'll be more than happy to respond.
Great, thank you so much, Ellie. And yeah, I think it's really impressive to be 96% plastic free is really, really inspirational for hopefully lots of people joining us today. And I think it's been really good to see how the changes you've made do translate into actual cost savings, and most importantly, as you said, a real reduction in the volume of plastics that you're using. So thank you, that was a really great way to kick off. And yeah, just a reminder to please, if you do have any questions, add them to the Q&A section and we'll hopefully get back to them. Well, we will get back to them at the end. So now I will move straight on to our second presenter, to Megan, who will hopefully can share some a similar experience, but I guess from a slightly different perspective, from a large global chain, which I imagine has its own challenges, but also a fantastic opportunity to be an industry leader and kind of pave the way for others. So yeah, I will pass you over to Megan. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, Ellie, because I would say every single one of your stories resonated very deeply with the experience that we had at Iberostar. And even though we are managing multiple portfolios, and this is a bit from the corporate perspective, I know that this was the reality for so many of our hotels. So I'm Megan, and I'm the Global Director of Sustainability at Iberostar Group. And I want to talk today about celebrating the 2 years that we've had free of single-use plastics across our over 100 hotels in 16 countries around the world, and how and why we're looking beyond to see what the next venture is and how we can continue to evolve this narrative. And in particular, I want to kind of speak a little bit about how we got to our journey and our objective of removing all single-use plastics across our properties in what ended up being a journey of the span of 18 months, right? So in 2018, our executive leadership made an announcement to have the ambition to be single-use plastics free. First, we did so just in our rooms and achieved that over the course of 2019, rolling out first in Spain and then through the rest of our properties in other countries. And then in our common areas as well throughout 2020. And then finally, after this ambition, launching what we call our Agenda 2030, which is really the root of our Wave of Change movement that helped us to kind of move beyond plastics and think about this holistic perspective, including our objective to send no waste to landfill by 2025. I want to be very explicit here that we are talking about the removal of single-use plastics. And so we defined single-use plastics as a product that had been made totally or partially with plastic that had been conceived, designed, or introduced into the market to be used once or for a short period of time before disposal. And one also encouraged too that it can be really tricky to know what is problematic, what is single use, and what some of the consequences are of making decisions around those items in your properties, which is one of the reasons why we're excited with TPI to be working on a methodology, right, for hotels and accommodation providers to be thinking about what that actually means. But, you know, I've got thousands of examples that are very akin to many of the examples that Ellie had shared from corporate discussions about butter containers and corporate discussions about the liners for the shoes in rooms and how we could even transform the materials that we were using for slippers in our rooms themselves, how we converted our toothbrushes from plastic toothbrushes covered in plastic to bamboo toothbrushes in cardboard boxes that were now on request at reception, right? And so these sorts of decisions are incredibly transversal, and something that I want to really kind of note too, that in order for us to achieve this in 18 months, I can tell you very few corporate processes function that efficiently and that quickly, right? So it really was this top-down, bottom-up grassroots movement across our entire organization that included our corporate message, but was really enacted through the leadership of all of our general managers and all of our purchasing departments and all of our suppliers in every single country that we were working in order to make this change. One of the other things that I want to note here that added an incredible amount of logistical and operative challenge to this process is that we elected in many of the countries, in all of the countries that we were working in the Caribbean, to move away not only from single-use plastics, but single-use bottles when it came to water, right? When it came to water itself. And so in many of the countries in which we were operating, water is not something that is available free and potably from the taps. And so this included investing in hundreds of point source filtration fountains, improving upon our water filtration system within our properties, if that was something that we could add to as well, and months and months and months of testing water quality to ensure the safety and the quality of the water to be able to remove single-use bottles, thinking very carefully about the implications to the customer experience as some of our segmentations that change meant that clients would be coming in after long travels into a room in a country that they've maybe never been to before, facing an empty water bottle with a sign and a map to find their refill station, encouraging them to join us in this movement. And a lot of bravery that was required on the part of our operations to make that jump and to see whether or not customers would be able and willing to move on this journey with us. And of course, that was something that we saw as successful to be able to work on this journey, to be able to now celebrate 2 years free of single-use plastics. There have been many results that I spoke about the single point filtration centers that we invested in around all of our properties. And an estimated diversion of over 6 million water bottles and about 396 tons of plastic over a 6-month period, which turns out is a relatively tricky figure to extrapolate, particularly if your portfolio also includes seasonal hotels and your purchasing is not always stable throughout time, right? So the measurement of how these numbers accumulate through the year is something that we're also working on and making sure that we can get a good understanding of the quantitative impact of any of these changes. But I think what was absolutely critical and one of the best benefits from our work on removing single-use plastics from our operation over that period of time is that it established a corporate culture of very ambitious action and pride, which facilitated what we call our Agenda 2030, which now includes objectives to send no waste to landfill across all of our operations by 2025, to reach carbon neutrality in our operations and our supply chain, which we estimate to be a roughly 1 million metric ton carbon footprint relative to a 2019 baseline by 2030, by decarbonizing our business as much as possible. And you'll see that the work on carbon emissions comes back in to question some of the decisions we made on plastics when in a next slide. To decarbonize as much as possible and then to offset any of the remaining emissions that we have in our operations through protecting and restoring nature in our destinations. We've got objectives around seafood because Wave of Change is really about a commitment to the oceans, and many of the destinations in which we operate, small scale fisheries, are a very important industry that coincide with tourism. And so we have objectives to have 100% of our seafood sourcing responsibly sourced by 2025, and a real commitment to the nature that surround our properties, because we fully understand that in order to remain resilient, facing things like increasing prevalence of hurricanes or increasing threats from climate change, we really need to invest in the ecosystem services that the nature provides around our properties. And this ambition from our work to remove single-use plastics facilitated our ability to be able to think ambitiously about other objectives. Another kind of narrative that I want to bring in is that this was tested heavily when we achieve or were achieving being free of single-use plastics in not only our rooms, but in our buffets and in general and common areas within our hotels, which midst the concerns about the elevated measures that we needed to take in response to health and safety to reopen in the midst of COVID-19. There were some very challenging conversations that we had to have, but through the leadership that we had and the science-driven approach, we had a medical advisory board, and our medical doctors would advise on the measures we needed to take for responding to the global pandemic. And they would give us 4 options of cleaning materials or various options for how our employees could respond safely. And then the sustainability office would filter those options for those that had minimal use of plastics or minimal impact on the environment, right? So this really kind of narrative and dialogue, but helped to facilitate Iberostar's example of remaining single-use plastic-free amidst a global uptick of use of plastics due to COVID-19 safety measures as something that we worked with GTPI to turn this into a case study and general recommendations that ultimately was endorsed by the World Health Organization on how tourism providers could respond to the pandemic and not see a great uptick in the use of plastics at the same time. This also, because of the level and scale of the changes that we made in our supply chain, as well as some of the impacts that we had that then came into question amidst the other ambitious actions that we adopted in 2020 with our Agenda 2030, right? Invited reflection into some of the trade-offs of an ambitious focus on plastics. And in particular, this is one that I think that we can see very commonly as a narrative, that we often move from plastic alternatives to glass alternatives, typically because there's not recycling facilities on site that maybe even accept aluminum as an alternative, or glass is more fitting for the luxury segmentation that we may be offering in. This doesn't have to be just with water, but this could be with our soft drink products or other products. And I think it's really well established that if there's not a really good reuse system of refilling those exact same glass water bottles, even if those glass water bottles are recycled, or if those glass bottles are recycled, they have a lot of really negative impacts in other areas, whether that be in the land impacts in producing that glass, or whether it be in the water consumption that was required to produce that glass, or as well in the carbon footprint producing this glass. This is a study that looked at the impacts of plastics versus single-use glass and found that single-use glass options were some of the worst, was worse all in all categories that they evaluated when thinking about the environmental impact in other areas, right? Plastics are a huge, huge issue. We need to think very critically about ensuring that no plastics enter into nature and thinking collaboratively on how it is that we do that work. But we also need to balance as well some of the challenges in making some of these decisions. This is part of the reason why we moved into this kind of framework of saying, how can we work to jump off of the ambition that we had on removing all single-use plastics across our operations to work to send no waste to landfill across our operations by 2025. And this is something that as well, we wanted to make sure was filled with very specific quantitative time-bound objectives that allows us to really engage deeply with segregating waste, taking a deep look and reflective thought into the waste streams that we are generating, that our clients are generating, thinking about how we can reduce those options, how we can reuse those options, how we can recycle those options or eliminate them altogether, right? Really kind of emphasizing the need to, just like when you were in kindergarten, think about your 3 Rs and work through them iteratively, right? Start with reducing and then think about reusing, and only at the end think about recycling, right? This objective is absolutely not to uptick our recycling rates. It's actually quite the opposite, to see if we can reduce all categories, especially those which we send to landfill. And this has really amplified some of the general barriers that we needed to overcome in our plastics journey, as well as start to open up our understanding of how we're thinking about the impact that our operations has in destinations, particularly those which are most vulnerable, like our small island developing states, which don't really have enough room to have enough waste management infrastructure to respond to some of these, the consumption rates that tourism can typically bring to these areas. I want to close by just talking about some of the barriers overcome and lessons learned. And I think one of the first one was that we needed to balance this bravery to act with the impact of the changes, right, that we made to the customer experience and to the employee experience, whether they were perceived. We had a lot of pushback, importantly so, from our operations when we said clients would arrive with unfilled water bottles and a map in their rooms. And we needed to push past that to demonstrate that we really received very few complaints once that transition was made. But we needed to make sure that we were listening to our employees who are the front line of understanding what makes a quality customer experience with our clients. We needed to think very critically about the supply chain logistics, right? This is not only about the supply. When you're demanding these like more boutique products as alternatives to the more standard options that are available, you need to have a certain volume of supply for it to make sense for your suppliers to bring into your destinations, right? And there's some costs that come with making those first moves, depending upon how much availability there is in the market of your supply chain and the places where you're operating. The stability of your supply chain as well. Any sort of supply chain logistic is greatly challenged right now with global inflation, the global instability that we're seeing with supply chains, and we needed to overcome those barriers while also dealing with maintaining the stability of not having single-use plastics. And then I think it's also really important to recognize too that, like, while we need to ensure that there are no plastics entering into nature, plastic is also a really incredible material. It's very light, it's flexible, it helps us to reduce on food waste in so many ways, right? When we moved to a lot of items that were bulk, we needed to also then consider how much more food waste we were creating, because if we didn't manage those bulk items in the correct way in a lot of our destinations, that could have consequences on our food waste impact. And so it's thinking a little bit as well about ensuring that we could counter the benefits of plastics, whether that be the weight in shipping or food waste that was generated, which are some of these other kind of areas that we needed to consider and are considering with a more holistic approach. I think one of the really key challenges that we needed to really dive into was embracing the fact that problematic items and packaging is really dependent on the maturity of the waste management infrastructure in your destination, right? If you have a waste management that is very mature and is able to accept lots of flexible plastic packaging to reuse and recycle, even if the recycling rates aren't that great relative to other materials, that's a lot better than a site that you have no aluminum or no glass recycling, and they do accept plastics, and all of a sudden you move from plastic water bottles, which were recyclable, to aluminum or cardboard or glass that now suddenly has no a provider to be able to receive those items, right? So problematic really depends on the destination and the infrastructure that is in those destinations. It's one of the reasons why we're very enthusiastic to be working with UNEP and the Global Environmental Facility on a massive islands waste management infrastructure development project to see how we can work in island networks to be able to improve upon waste management infrastructure to respond exactly to these sorts of challenges. And second to last, I think it's very important to recognize that it's easy to start by just taking incremental actions, right? Let's remove an item, let's remove 2 items, let's remove 5 items. But when you say something really bold and brave, like, actually, let's be single-use plastics free in 18 months, we're not sure how to get there, but we know that we have to try. It can have a really positive and catalytic impact on your employees that get them more engaged, them more enthusiastic about this journey with you, that can have benefits in employee retention and the value that they drive from their work, right? So this bold and brave action has additional benefits that one can consider. And finally, yes, we have anecdotes and examples of where customers have lauded our efforts. Yes, we have examples of awards that we have won in response to this movement to remove single-use plastics. But I think it most importantly shouldn't be the only driver of why you reduce your plastics consumption, because these business cases can be hard to pull out and they can be hard to measure and drive and demonstrate in many scales. And it really does need to be something that is value driven, efficiency driven, and needs a kind of very multifaceted approach in order to think about the transitions that are needed in order to make this journey. So some thoughts from describing our journey to speaking a little bit about where we're going now and the barriers and barriers overcome and lessons learned. And I'm enthusiastic to hear Joe speak and then also open this up for questions. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Megan. That was another really inspirational presentation. And I think you really covered so many points and so many of the challenges around doing this kind of thing, like, you know, factoring in customer experience, obviously implementing these changes through COVID, which was a hugely challenging time. And, you know, the difficulty, I guess, in assessing trade-offs and the inclination to replace single-use plastic with another single-use. But I think it was also, you really covered the opportunities for doing this as well. So, you know, kind of how fulfilling it can be to engage leadership, which I know, Ella, you mentioned as well, having leadership on your side and kind of boosting staff pride and morale even. And also I guess the importance of looking at improving your circularity of plastics and plastic reduction, but also how that links to kind of broader goals around decarbonisation and regeneration. And yeah, and I think it's really great to, as you said at the end there, to just aim high and set really big goals and work it out from there. So yeah, thanks again, Megan, that was great. So now we'll go to our final presentation, which is from Joe Hendricks. So I'll let you speak, Joe. Thanks.
Lovely, great, thank you. Can you see the screen okay there? Great. So yeah, thank you very much. I apologize if there's any background noise here. I'm actually in Mallorca finishing a 4-year plastics project with some hotels, and we're just in a hotel because we were kicked out of our room and we're running to the airport at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to whiz through my slides, I think, to make sure that we get home in time. And we don't have a lot of time to cover. So in a very quick nutshell, for those of you that don't know me or travel without plastic, I've worked in plastic reduction in hotels since 2011, thanks to having been involved in Travel Foundation projects before, but I actually founded Travel Without Plastic in 2017, so I could concentrate specifically on this topic. And we work with hotels who are not quite as advanced yet as Sancta Canapa or Iberostar to help them, but with a range of services that you can see that we've got there on the screen. So some of the things that we try to help the hotels with are really thinking about the business case. Most of them know the environmental impacts of plastic pollution now, so we don't generally need to cover that so much anymore, but we look at how they can start or accelerate their activity and overcome some of these barriers and to engaging staff and guests that Megan has just talked about. So for many hotels that we work with, single-use plastic is really cheap, so it's difficult for the hotels to be able to see the cost benefit, even from some of the longer term initiatives that Ellie talked about. Generally, we find it's because there's a trend for them just to replace single-use plastic with single-use something else, and those something else's are generally more expensive per unit. So we do help them to overcome that, but we also get them to think about the other business benefits as well, but perhaps they're a bit more difficult to financially quantify. So for instance, I quite regularly check feedback on TripAdvisor, and I'll search for the word plastic when I'm looking around at hotels. And you can often find it's the one thing that's really letting a hotel down and preventing their 5-star review. And I think so many guests are more aware now of the issues of plastic, and they're taking steps to reduce it in their own lives. So it's very frustrating for them to find so much single-use plastic in a hotel, and they're quite happy to post about that publicly. But on the other hand, they're also happy to publicly congratulate hotels that are taking action. And this feedback, when people go to look at it on TripAdvisor, I think it also helps people to prepare for what changes have been made in the hotels. So I put a little line in the chat before. Here in Mallorca, where we are just now, there's a lot of hotels that are charging €1 deposit for the reusable plastic glasses because they were having the same problems. They were losing them at the end of the season, and that costs a lot of money and it's a lot of waste. And in most cases, even though the hotels thought that would be quite negatively taken by the guests, it's actually been really positive, and it's given them some great reviews. And as I say, it's helping others to be able to plan when they're going on holiday. They're going to expect this because they've read the reviews already. And I think from other sides to the business, you know, it's increasingly important now to be able to demonstrate that hotels are meeting sustainability criteria. It's an expectation in some cases to even obtain or renew contracts with tour operators, but also to be able to attract those many travellers that want to be able to stay in sustainable accommodations, but believe that there aren't enough of them to choose from. But some of the financial benefits that I wanted to share as well, and this is how we try to help move hotels from single-use plastic to single-use something else. We've done some great pilot projects throughout the project that we're currently finishing in Mallorca. This is one of them. So it was a trial that we did in the guest rooms, and we found a local supplier of toiletry products. And what they did is they would take this 5-litre bottle that you can see there in the picture. They would take them back to their premises. They would clean them, they would refill them, and they were able to do that up to a total of 30, so 30 times in line with the local health authorities here before they had to replace them. So the hotel previously, they'd already got rid of the miniature plastics, but the 300 milliliter bottles that they were using, they were going into the recycling straight after use. So they were still getting through around 2,000 and something bottles a year. Once we put these 5-litre bottles into a kind of circular loop, if you like, and we did the calculations, that hotel was then going to save or go down from 2,500 plastic bottles just under to literally using 5. And they were going to get that payback in, you know, just under 2 years. So it really made sense in all senses of the word to make this change. And it was really the supplier that was key to that, having a flexible supplier that enabled them to achieve that goal. And then there was a similar story in the same hotel. We trialed these reusable and washable bin liners, which the housekeeping team really liked. I thought they were going to hate it, to be honest. I was really quite scared to try this, but we helped them by creating some new procedures for when they would need to be changed and machine washed, and when they would just need to be wiped down with the sanitizer inside if there'd just been a newspaper in it or something. And the financial and plastic saving that you can see there, those results were really quite significant. So what could hotels do? I was posed this question by the Travel Foundation to kind of, you know, quickly reduce impacts and accelerate that journey towards circularity. So I think one of the things to do is to really be a critical friend to your own business, a bit, you know, very much like actually what Iberostar and what Ellie have been doing. So take a look at those items that are used around the hotel, and bearing in mind how Megan's just explained that, asking yourself, are they really necessary? Are they really adding value to the guest experience, or are they just being used because this is what you've always done? It's a habit. And answer those questions really honestly, and then commit to eliminating things that are completely unnecessary. Some questions that we say to hotels, for instance, you know, ask yourself, do guests really choose your hotel because you've got some slippers that are wrapped in plastic in the bathroom? You know, or do they really need the plastic shower cap to be waiting for them in the room? Or could you make these sorts of things available on request? So I think one of the quickest ways to move forward is to be that critical friend, ask unpopular questions, but in a respectful way, get the information back from the staff, answer them honestly, and then start to making those changes and get that momentum as you move forward. Definitely, again, as Megan's highlighted, it does concern me actually that so many hotels tend to just do this simple switch from single-use plastic to single-use something else. And it's obvious a lot of the time it's because it's the easiest option, to be honest. But, you know, in small islands where there's not a lot of alternatives available at a reasonable price, it's certainly going to increase the cost, and it doesn't help you to reduce overall waste if you really want to be heading towards circularity. We need to be making significant changes and getting our guests to become accustomed to doing things differently. And it is very good to always remember that not all of the alternatives are as green as they might seem on the surface. I mean, I continue to be quite surprised by how many people don't realise that paper cups are lined with plastic, you know, but UNEP has got a really good guide, a life cycle report, that's really helpful for people if they're in a purchasing role to be able to use that when making more informed decisions. I loved I wish I could screenshot that. I'm glad we're going to get the slides, because I loved how Ellie had gone out and said to their suppliers, you need to help us with this. You know, if you're not prepared to help, then perhaps we're not prepared to do business with you anymore. So one of the things that we always explain to the hotels we work with is ask your current suppliers to help you to do this. Don't do it all on your own. The more people that are looking for alternative processes, procedures and products, then perhaps the quicker that you're going to find them. But if they can't or won't help, open the doors if you can to other suppliers. There could be people out there like Tot-Herber, the supplier that we found in Mallorca, that are willing to be flexible, willing to change their business model so that you can achieve yours. And obviously, if you're part of a chain or a large group, it's not necessarily a quick thing to do. You have to work with authorized suppliers, but perhaps if you're the general manager of that hotel, there's an opportunity for you to make people in central procurement aware of new opportunities so that they can create some guidelines and procedures to ensure that quality and safety and all of those things are met when you're working with new suppliers. It will take some time, but I do think it's worth doing. And then change, obviously, you all know this if you're working in hotels, it's never easy. We are going to face obstacles in the way, but I think it's the mindset that really helps. So the concerns, that the ones that we most often hear from hoteliers are the ones that you can see on the left of the screen there. And what we'll do in a workshop situation when we have more time is we tend to sit down and we ask them to look at those questions on the left, which is like the problem mindset, and try to change it. So, okay, what do we need to do to change that? How could we do it differently? Imagine for a minute that your boss came in today and said to you, right, everything we do from now on has got to have waste reduction in mind. That's got to be the most important thing. What would you need to change in your business? How would you need to budget that? What would need to happen? Who would need to be involved? And then we get all of those ideas on the table and help people to work through those. And as everybody else has alluded to already, it's also really important that the staff and the guests are involved in that. The easier it is for staff, we find anyway, with the work that we do, the more likely it is that they are to make changes. But again, as Megan alluded to, we need to be more radical if we're going to make those changes work. And it's actually great to see that that was a great catalyst to get people involved and to get them to be more motivated and to act more quickly. If there are benefits to staff, we do find that that can work. But at the same time, you know, people are always going to say, we don't like change. We're still going to have to push through this and help them to feel competent that they can do this. They can explain the changes confidently to the guests, and that they don't feel that anything is going to come back negatively on them. And then what we find works best, hotels that we've worked with over the years now to get guests involved are these 4 engagement strategies. So that I think guests appreciate really easy and clear instructions. So if you're making bathroom dry amenities available on request, make sure they know how to ask for that service and make sure they get them quickly. Tell them why you're doing it, tell them that you're doing these actions to reduce single-use plastic, and tell them what you've achieved so far. So, you know, we've eliminated 10,000 single-use plastic items by doing this, and the benefits, you know, as Ellie was showing, keeping the beaches free from plastic so that your family has a great time while you're here on holiday, or so that local people, you know, have a nice clean beach to go to, rather than just help us save the planet, which is a bit too generic and doesn't necessarily get people so engaged. And then think about all those touch points, not just in the hotel, but before people travel, whilst they're in the hotel, obviously, as well, but newsletters, social media, you know, in-room TV channels, posters in the lift, so many touch points after they've left you as well, including the way that you respond to TripAdvisor comments. So finally, to finish quickly, what we've seen over the years amongst the hotels that are doing this very well are these 4 common traits, if you like. So firstly, and probably most importantly, is they've just got an unfailing commitment to change. They're not easily distracted from this. You know, as Megan said, with the pandemic, it's challenging and it's hard, but they didn't let it take them off their journey. You know, they really want to be part of this change, and they've got a plan to get there. And they're willing, and that's really key, they're actually willing to revise their policies and standards so that they help them to reduce waste, and they actively seek support and build relationships with new suppliers and new businesses that share the same goals. And they are definitely proactively involving their guests. So, I mean, I could talk forever about it. We didn't have a lot of time. So I hope that's helpful. And it'd be great to share other ideas, hear from others. And if I do have to shoot off early, please let me know of any questions and I'll respond via email or a different way. Thank you.
Great, that's brilliant. Thanks, Jo. And I know you've got to head off really quickly. So, but yeah, I think that was really great to, as a reminder again, of just taking a step back and thinking, not shall we replace this item, but do we actually need this item in the first place? And also, I think what's interesting is the importance of actually taking the time to train staff in new policies and procedures. So obviously, it's great when they're all on board and it can be really, you know, morale boosting, but you need to make sure that they've been given the adequate information and training to get on board in the first place. As we are running out of time, I'm going to go to some questions. I can see that Megan, you have already answered one around like particular standards on food hygiene and food safety and how that can maybe influence how you reduce plastics and what you need to do to replace plastic, if you like. And I guess that's something that's come up through COVID as well. And maybe, Jo, have you logged up? Maybe given that you've worked across lots of different hotels, do you have any advice on that? I presume it's something that each business, depending where you're situated, will need to look at local laws around things like health and safety and look at what the alternatives are. But do you have any advice on that?
Were you directing that at me? Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Jo. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I turned the video off because I'm packing a bag and I didn't want to look.
That's fine. I thought I'd go to you first on the first question because I know you need to leave. So
I think it's really just to not feel that single-use plastic is the hygienic answer to everything, because it isn't. It's a process that guarantees hygiene and that guarantees cleaning. So just because something is covered in plastic doesn't mean that it's going to be more hygienic. And I think, yes, you've got to take into consideration legislation around food safety and all those sorts of things. But we see, you know, apples and bananas even wrapped in plastic for hygiene. And, you know, there are just some very silly things that go on. Plastic sachets, like I talk about this all the time, ketchup and mayonnaise and those sorts of things. Actually take a bit of time and watch how people react with single-use items, because when you're flicking through a box of single-use sachets and you're putting them back, or you can't open them, so you give them to somebody else and you try to open them with your teeth and you still put it back, you know, that's really unhygienic, as opposed to having a full-size bottle that's very easy to clean and that's actually much easier to recycle. So it's really about thinking logically and also thinking, how are people going to interact? How are human beings going to behave with some of these changes, and really focusing on processes and not products.
great, yeah. And I think, yeah, the importance of using logic, because I think for a while, another question was around COVID and suddenly wrapping everything in plastic. And actually, as you said, that's not always the most hygienic option. I guess kind of related to that, in terms of looking at different things in different locations, I was going to quickly ask Megan, when you're talking about trade-offs and thinking about local recycling facilities and things like that, when you implemented these changes across Eurostar Group, have you had to do a nuanced approach in different locations depending on that, or have you kind of done a blanket approach to the changes you've made, or different things happening in different regions depending on local capacity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. What we found overall, and I'll be brief with this, is that providers typically exist even if they're small private providers and they're not on a government level. If you can effectively segregate your plastic, so or your materials, so segregation is the key player for a lot of our ability to be able to revalue materials at the end of their use on our properties. But consistently, the largest challenge, which we also find in places like the US, is organic waste. Organic waste is one of the waste streams that we find has the most potential to be revalued at the end of its use, but does not have the infrastructure to be able to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan. And another question I'm just looking at here, well, it was about COVID and travellers' acceptance. But I think that kind of goes wider to generally customers' acceptance. And I know someone said, Ellie, they're really impressed with how you can engage suppliers, and I think we've talked about that, but perhaps, Ellie, you could talk about any pushback that you've had from customers and how you've responded to that. You're on mute still, so.
Lovely. Well, we did have obviously the challenges there. We guessed they didn't want to sanitize and no mask and all this kind of stuff. One thing that we refused to do at Saktanaba during COVID is to use plastic gloves. Instead of that, we had a staff member at the entrance of the buffet who was ensuring that everybody, no fly could go in without disinfecting their hands and wear a mask. Now, in regards to the cutlery, we never wrapped anything in plastic. We always had the cutlery as we have them always. So our guests didn't see any difference in that. So I can't talk about the reaction from being wrapped and unwrapped.
More generally, in the changes you've made, so forgetting COVID for a minute, have you had any, well, I think you've said to me previously that the response has generally been really, really positive, and is that mainly the case? Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And we have a lot of support from our guests in general with all the initiatives we have taken, because we're communicating them constantly. And with the staff is training, mentoring, reminding, praising. They know exactly what it is. If a guest asks them, they have the right answer to give. We have little challenges, as you do with everything. But in majority, we are very, very pleased with our guest support, honestly. Then I can say with TripAdvisor, we had guests that they given us 1 star because we didn't have amenities in the rooms. And this is what I love. I love this challenge. So I sit there and I explain everything. They may write a sentence, a paragraph with 10 sentences, and I write the whole book about what we do at Saktanaba and why we're doing it and everything. And then I get other guests that they come above and say, what are you on about? We went and stayed at Saktanaba and they do this and this and this and this, and they're supporting us. And this is for us, it does say that with persistence, you can do it, and you can do it right.
So you've got guests doing a promotion for you.
I know we do, honestly, in many occasions we did, and on Google and on TripAdvisor.
No, that's really great. And I think, as you said before, I think the communication is the key, isn't it, with staff, leadership, and your guests as to why you're doing it. I know Jo mentioned that as well in her presentation.
The guests as well. When you make sense to people why something is happening, they understand and they follow. If you tell them, oh, we are an environmental hotel and it's this is what we do, they will forget it. You need to for it. You need to spend a couple of minutes to explain and give the little details so they understand what is the reason behind it.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we're really over time already, so I'm going to quickly move on. Terry, if you could just put up the final few slides, because I just wanted to mention, which I know Megan mentioned in her presentation, the GTPI, which is the Global Tourism Plastic Initiative, hosted by UNWTO and the One Planet Network. And on screen, there's some links of how you can join that, but just a Google search and you can find that. So we'd really encourage you to sign up to this initiative if you haven't done so already. Already over 100 businesses have signed up and made a series of commitments aimed at reducing or eliminating plastics. And becoming a signatory is pretty easy. So I think the next slide shows those steps that you can take. It's a really, really simple process. So please go and do that if you haven't already. And it's not just about commitments, it's also about the benefits, as we've heard in the presentations today. So, by joining the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, you can actually increase your profitability, your visibility, your competitiveness, and your overall resilience and sustainability as a business. So please do go and visit that website. There's a wealth of really useful information resources there to support tourism businesses to take action and to start to measure your progress as well. So lastly, I just want to point you in the direction of the final webinar that we're doing in our series for the Transforming Tourism Value Chains project. And that's a week today. And that will look at how we can accelerate sustainable food systems in your business. So please join for that one too. So yeah, that's the end of it today. Thank you so much for everyone who's attended, and a really big thank you to our fantastic speakers, to Ellie, Megan and Joe, who's had to dash to the airport. But yeah, for really demonstrating effective, manageable and practical ways that hospitality businesses can take action to reduce waste and boost the circularity of plastics in their business. So yeah, I hope you found it useful, and thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.